Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and happy Kwanzaa, the African American celebration of life. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tim Russell, Vice President, Community Engagement for WTTW WFMT, and welcome to today's Chicago Tonight Black Voices, a WTTW news community conversation. WTTW's purpose is to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. With WTTW News Community Conversations, we hope to surface and spotlight people, ideas, and stories behind the headlines by creating a forum for residents, community based organizations, community leaders, and residents that have authentic conversations. Co anchor for Chicago Tonight and Black Voices host Brandis Friedman will moderate this evening discussion focusing on the significance of Watch Night and New Year's Day celebrations for the Black community. Lead sponsor for Chicago Tonight Black Voices is provided by Fifth Third Bank. Additional support is provided by Gertrude and James Wooten Jr., the Joseph and Bessie Feinberg Foundation, the Abe and Ida Cooper Foundation, Greenberg and Toric LLP, Nicholas Anton, Judy and John McCarter, and the Heranda and Paul Donahue. Now let's watch a sneak peek at Chicago Tonight Black Voices.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. What are some of the issues that Black women want to see tackled in this election cycle?
If we can get past the idea of turning this into a political topic and really get to serving our communities, that's something I can get behind.
You are the first Black NFL team president.
Maybe we can use this as a calling card to unite.
We have to work together in order to make the world work.
Hey, there's everybody. Sorry about that. It takes a couple of clicks to get my Zoom to cooperate, but hello and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices, a WTTW News community conversation. And thank you for spending your evening with us. I am Brandis Friedman. Tonight, as you heard, we are, talking about the significance of Watch Night and New Year's Day celebrations for the Black community, and nearly 160 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, where the country stands today. So thanks again to all of you for joining us. I want you to know that you are all in a listen only mode, but that does not mean that you can't be a part of the conversation. In fact, we would love for you to chime in on the chat function with your questions and comments. Of course, I will be sure to share those with our guests. So before we get to it, let's introduce our guests and thank them for taking time out of their busy holiday schedules to talk with us. First, I'd like to introduce Reverend Dr. Waltrina Middleton, Executive Director of the Community Renewal Society. Hello. Also, Dr. Gilo Kwesi Logan, a Justice Studies professor at the Northeastern Illinois University and a historian, I do get paid to talk, of African Studies and African American culture. Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright, Pastor Emeritus at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. And Krista Hamilton, Executive Director of Centers for New Horizons. Thanks to all of you for joining us and taking the time, and Merry Christmas and Happy Kwanzaa and Happy New Year. So of course, the purpose of our discussion tonight, it is the history and significance of Watch Night. But because we are lucky enough to have Reverend Doctors Wright and Middleton here, we'll ask them a little bit about newsier topics later on when we hope to get to that. And again, you will have the opportunity to submit your questions in the chat function as well. But first, let's start with Watch Night. It's also known as Freedom's Eve, and it commemorates the anniversary of December 31st, 1962, when African Americans around the country awaited to see if President Abraham Lincoln would sign the Emancipation Proclamation. Dr. Logan, let's start with you, please. Can you take us back to December 1862? What was that night like as enslaved Americans were up waiting for midnight?
Yeah, thank you and good evening, everyone. First, think of a people who, for some, have been enslaved for hundreds of years, right? Or to who freedom was just a word or a fleeting notion, or even something to be longed for. So when I think of Freedom's Eve, I think of a fireball of hope, anticipation, desire, and anxiety. So African Americans across the United States, both freed and enslaved, in the North and in the South in particular, they met in churches, but also in barns, in cabins, in private homes, in the fields, around praying trees, wherever they could, in great anticipation, awaiting the news and confirmation of the enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation. So they would gather at sunset on December 31st. Candles and torches or lanterns dimly lit the space. Imagine a haunting wailing and calling. Imagine a call and response, praying, teaching, preaching, spoken word, evoking the power, force, and energy of the Creator and of their ancestors. Some of them catching the Holy Ghost in reverence and in praise and in summoning those forces and energies in a call for liberation. So this would go on all night, all morning long until sunrise, and in great anticipation of the Emancipation Proclamation going into effect. So they were watching for the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation, but they were not simply watching for an emancipation. For too often, the story of enslaved Africans is told as if they were the ones waiting for liberty, wishing for it, asking for it, or being very passive, versus them being portrayed as what they are, active participants and instigators in their own liberation. So African Americans were watching for the opportunity to fight for freedom. And Abraham Lincoln, he welcomed this because he knew and he was very clear that people of African descent, the African freedom fighters, were needed. They were a needed military force to save the Union.
And of course, we know President Lincoln eventually did sign the Emancipation Proclamation. But at what point was it that enslaved Americans actually felt their freedom and felt like they were free?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I would say from that time until this time today, we as a people, we've always had among our people those who felt it was better to be a well-fed slave than a hungry free person. So while some were whitewashed into believing that they were free on the plantation, some felt that they were free when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Some felt it was when they escaped to the North. Some once they gained political power. For some, it was once they had military power. Some, it was once they had economic power. But yet, from that time until all the way today, many people among the African Americans still do not feel like they are free.
Reverend Dr. Middleton, I want to bring you in now. What can you tell us about the Gullah Geechee traditions related to Watch Night and New Year's Day celebrations?
Yes, I have very fond memories of my childhood growing up in the Gullah Sea Islands of South Carolina. And Watch Night still is a very emotional thing for me to talk about. It fills me up with a lot of joy because it was such an intersectional experience in terms of generations. And even hearing Dr. Logan describe the atmosphere is quite accurate. On the property that my grandparents owned since the early 1900s, they built what they call the classroom. And the classroom was a structure there where people went to learn how to read and write, where if the dirt roads were washed out and they couldn't make it to the actual church, they would have worship service there and they would have midweek service there. And that was often on occasion a place where Watch Night would take place, in the classroom, in the little shack or hut that they built on their property for worship. And I just want to back up just a little bit to talk a little bit about September in 1862, because Blacks or enslaved persons who had been informed, who had the opportunity to actually learn how to read and write, had already been informed that there's this pre-proclamation order that was being instituted. And so preparation was taking place since September of that year. The excitement was building up since September, preparing for the rituals on the 31st of December, where we see the rituals of the foods that prepared, the praise and worship, the call and response. I think for me, what I remember is when the lights were dimmed and the deacons or the elders in the church would go into these little rooms and they would do this call and response where someone actually pretended to be the watchman. And they would sing this song called Oh, watchman, please tell me the hour of the night. And they would do that for back and forth repeatedly until it became closer to midnight. And the prayers, it was almost just as Dr. Logan said, it felt like thunder. The prayers would just fill the place, and you really could feel the power and presence of God, and people just overjoyed by the idea that we are being brought into a new year. And I could only connect that culturally and through the lineage of time with those who are awaiting liberation, and the prayers of falling on your knees, praying and waiting to usher in this new day, this new moment, and how that continued to stay with their descendants. My grandparents certainly passed that on to me. And so when I am in this space, I feel very much so connected with the ancestors from that era, that period, and the hope that they carried, I still carry today. And so in the Gullah tradition, rich in the spirit of Denmark VC, rich in the spirit of the Gullah tradition, the food, the language, the music, all of that is a critical component. And because of the isolation of the Sea Islands, the narratives that we often hear about Juneteenth is quite comparable to the Sea Islands, where the message of liberation was often delayed. And so some of those communities that were in isolated islands didn't necessarily have the communication. So this idea of celebrating liberation was very profound and meaningful to the Gullah Geechee Sea Island culture.
Wow, that's a very eloquent and informed response. Thank you. Krista Hamilton, what do those services look like today?
Right, hard to come behind you, Reverend Middleton. So I attend Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church. And for us, very similar in spirit, as a person who goes to church every Sunday, it has been very challenging for me through the pandemic. I actually had to start practicing what I preach about, the church is not the building, building the churches with you, and, creating my sanctuary at home. Typically in our sanctuary, there's a lot of singing, praying, we're bringing things to the altar for the new year. We're leaving things at the altar from the previous year, and, lots of worshiping for about 2 to 3 hours. Lots of times we write lists of things that we want to actually physically take to the altar for our pastor to pray over. We pray for each other. So there's a lot of walking around, talking, praying, just a super emotional evening for many of the people that decide to participate in Watch Night. So for me, it's just a night of deep reflection and introspection of, where I've been, where I'm going. And I think this year is going to be very interesting how people are able to have those feelings at home. But I think the church community has done an amazing job to provide those virtual environments for us to really still partake or participate in those type of services.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably get to that a little bit more later on as well. Reverend Dr. Wright, I want to bring you in. Obviously, the events of 2020 have changed the church-going practices for many of the faithful, as we've heard here tonight. What will celebrations at Trinity United Church of Christ Chicago look like this year?
Having been retired for 12 years and 10 months, I should say I can't answer that.
Not that you're counting 12 years and 10 months. Right. What would you say Watch Night means for you this year?
To try to answer your first question, Dr. Moss, Otis Moss III, has adjusted well. In fact, he has on his staff a digital pastor. So I'm sure what he has planned will resemble December 31st for the past 12 or before pandemic, which is, Chrissy didn't mention it, includes dancing, not just singing and testimonies and praying, but dancing. 2 types of dancing: sacred dance before midnight, then the congregation goes down on its knees at Trinity at 3 minutes to 12 to pray out the old year and pray in the new year. And as Dr. Middleton said, the lights are dim, the lights are dimmed, the lights are cut off, where it's pitch black to simulate what it was like in the South for the enslaved Africans at midnight. We didn't have deacons in the room singing Watchman One of the Night. But as a child, I learned that's where the shooting started. At midnight, shooting signaled this is a new year. And it was not just celebratory shooting. It was because the Emancipation Proclamation, written on September 22nd, Dr. Middleton, don't ever forget that date, September 22nd, my birthday, was going into effect at 12:01, January 1, 1863. And for many Black men enslaved, it meant that they could now be a part of the Union Army legally. It had three major effects that Lincoln had in mind when he wrote it in September. One was to prohibit the French and the British from entering the war on the side of the Confederacy. Two was to make it legal for Blacks, 160,000 of them, to become Union troops. And thirdly, that all the Africans in the states that had seceded would be free. Now, growing up in a home like mine, my father and my mother are from the South, so I like lived in two worlds. They said they knew and were taught when they were children that the Emancipation Proclamation was only for the Africans enslaved in the South. Lincoln didn't touch the borderline states or the North because of money, capitalism, industrial, and he didn't want states to decide that they wanted to be slave states if he mandated that their enslaved persons would be free. For me, it meant praying, and the drama was heightened in the North with lights being turned down. In the South, at my grandfather's church, they had those candle lights with the glass, where they blow them out as the hour approached midnight. And I said two types of dancing, Kwesi, sacred dancing until midnight, then celebratory Black folk dancing after midnight for safety reasons. When I was a child, there was no problem in going out 12:10, 12:15 after benediction. Now with people shooting to kill, we always have a party after 12 o'clock midnight until around 1 when the shooting has died down or when law enforcement has curtailed the shooting that goes on. It means an awful lot to me. It brings back memories from my earliest childhood, being taken to church on watch meeting night, watching the clock, wondering if the clock on the wall. We didn't have digital clocks back then, if that was right, compared to our watches on our wrists. And as Dr. Middleton said, the food, always black eyed peas, New Year's Eve.
Black eyed peas and I think some collard greens maybe. So you're Reverend Wright, you're talking about ways of celebrating. Dr. Logan, I want to bring you back in. Are there other traditions or ways of celebrating that have changed throughout the years? Have there been parades?
I mean, just as we as a people are diverse, we have diverse ways of celebrating, from, if you want to say, parades down to, what takes place in our home in a very intimate fashion, down to what takes place still in the church today. So I think that, the diversity of experiences with oppression and the diversity of ways that we liberated ourselves reflects the diversity of ways that we celebrate this notion of Freedom Day. For me, I often say that freedom is not granted or given. I'm sorry, freedom is given, but liberation is created or earned. And when I think of Watch Night, it's really important to me because first it reflects the fact that even today, African Americans still are watching for the hour that the policies and practices of our federal government align with our prayers and our requests and our demands as people of color and as Black and brown people for racial justice. And I think it also reflects the reality that people of African descent and throughout the African diaspora still need to watch for opportunities to fight for our freedom and liberation. And we are creating opportunities and we are fighting for racial justice just as the struggle continues. And I think that, this notion of Watch Night and how it's celebrated and the significance today, it shows that the history of the African in the Americas and what we have lived through, what we fought for, what we died for on this soil embodies the essence of what it means to be a patriot. So for me, it's a point of pride, it's a point of identity, because along with our white allies and Native American allies, we freed ourselves. We fought for our emancipation, for our liberation, and in doing so, we helped to save the Union.
I also want to take a minute to remind those of you who are joining us that you can use the chat function to submit your own questions to our guests. I find that sometimes the people who are attending have better questions than I do sometimes. So Krista, I want to get you back in here. So it's been nearly 158 years since the Emancipation Proclamation, but of course, 2020 has seen the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many before them. But what's happened this year, of course, has brought racial justice to the forefront of national and local conversations. Do you think there's some greater significance to Watch Night celebrations this year?
Yeah, I do. I believe that this year, I think we all have a deeper appreciation for life. We survived a lot, so this year was very heavy. So to be on the other side, to make it to Watch Night, I think the significance of that will be great for many of us. The racial injustice, depending on what side of the fence you are on with that, it brought out a lot of emotions for many people. And I think we're going to carry that spirit into Watch Night, thinking about how much more we need to fight. I think as Dr. Logan mentioned, many people, we still are not completely free in a lot of ways. We still are not treated equal. So to bring those things to Watch Night service and the spirit of wanting to continue the fight, but fighting in the spiritual way for many people that participate in those type of services, I think this year will be much more impactful for us as we, walk toward the new year and think about things that we could do differently in ways that we could be more impactful into the new year.
Okay. So earlier this month, we spoke with religious leaders about how they're helping their community through this pandemic. I want to play a clip from Michael Trail. He's an associate pastor at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church in Chicago's Lakeview neighborhood.
Because for many of our either young adults or even for some of our older population who come to church at Our Lady of Mount Carmel, this may be one of the few opportunities where they're able to step outside of their houses and to come and pray together as a community. In addition to that, it's the reaching out on the parishes end to those who are isolated. We've kind of created a network of calling for one another, either myself or the other priests in the house, where we call parishioners who we know are isolated, or we've also found parishioners calling one another who are able to connect and to really keep that connection going.
So Reverend Dr. Wright, I wanted to throw you this question. How important is it to continue these religious traditions and finding ways to come together during a tumultuous time?
I think it is very important. Particularly for the generations behind us. African American and African history are not taught, as Dr. Logan can attest, in the public schools and secondary education. A lot of our kids don't know these traditions. They need to be taught to understand how old the traditions are, what they mean, and why we celebrate them. No Jew would ever forget the Holocaust. For so many African American kids, take Texas for an example, where a Black parent caught the Texas, I think it was Random House, textbooks in high school defined Africans' chattel slavery as agricultural workers who came here to help with the crops. Now that's what Black kids and white kids and Hispanic kids and Asian kids are growing up. To counter that narrative with truth is very important. Most African American children, I would bet you, do not know what Gullah is. They've never seen a Gullah Bible. They've never heard the Gullah language spoken. They don't know the Gullah dialect or dietary traditions. A beautiful language. And if we don't teach it, it's never going to get taught. Dr. Bobby Wright used to always, one of the founders of the Association of Black Psychologists, used to ask consistently, why do you want your history taught by your enemy? And that is exactly what is happening. So these traditions are crucial in terms of carrying on the traditions and having young people know what they mean. I started to ask before we went live, Brandon, what day of the week is Kwesi?
I'm sorry.
Sunday.
Sunday? Did you say Sunday? I'm Kojo.
Sunday.
Monday. How many Black kids know that? They look right at his name and say, that Kwanzaa, what did that do? Because our traditions aren't taught, our languages aren't taught, our culture's not taught, our religious traditions aren't taught. Christianity before slavery is not taught. So these traditions are very important. Two other things tacked on to the question you asked Dr. Logan. I did not find out until I was a grown man that you call this Freedom Eve. In many places in the country, watch meeting is not observed, but January 1st is observed as Emancipation Day. And depending on the demographics, Sister Friedman, of a small Southern Black community, the celebration there will be very different from a major urban metropolitan area. So there were parades and parties out in the open. I think of places like some of the parishes in New Orleans or Louisiana, to be more exact. Some of the places in Alabama, all Black. You don't have to worry about the man coming over there messing with you. In those kind of communities, there were parades with folk doing a strut to the music and the beats. There was drumming, which slave masters had prohibited. There was African drumming, which was reserved particularly among the Gullah, Geechee Gullah people, but in other places as well. So it depends on where you're talking about as to what kind of celebration went on and took place. That has been my experience.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Reverend Milton.
I would agree, and I would just briefly add that the celebration, the rituals that people came to expect for Watch Night continue to be really important. So as Dr. Wright indicated, you have the celebration in the church, and then there's some other celebration that may go on else afterwards, but people would make sure that they arrived into the sanctuary, whatever that looked like, so that there was an opportunity to give thanks before they did the after hour thing. But some of those celebratory rituals that continue to be very critical, I know in my Gullah community, are the testimonies. Folks would come in to make sure that they were able to offer testimonies.
We call them spoken word.
Spoken word.
We call them testimonies.
Okay, spoken word. Thank you, Dr. Wright. There was the call and response, and even the music had significant meaning that I, like Dr. Wright said, learned and came to have a better understanding of as I got older. I know a common celebratory song was "I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord." In Kumbaya, all of these songs had different meanings that had double narratives of celebration, of liberation, and hopefulness as well. So I would say just some of the rituals that people coming in front of the church to give your testimony, to say, look how far God has brought me through this year, as our sister Krista shared, looking at all that we have gone through in the year before us, and being able to give voice to that testimony, it was very critical and expected. And usually it came with a song. You didn't come up in front to give your testimony without a song helping you to segue into that moment.
So we're also in the middle of Kwanzaa. Dr. Logan, obviously we know it's a holiday about looking back and looking forward. Do you think, or how do you think the founder of Kwanzaa, why do you think he chose the week between Christmas and New Year's for this holiday?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think first, Dr. Maulana Karenga, he did this to give Kwanzaa in general, just to give us as a people a culturally relevant alternative to the existence of Christmas, right? So it gave us an opportunity to really celebrate our own history, our own identity, our own traditions, our own culture, our own values, rather than to simply imitate the practices of the dominant society. So it's important to also note that Kwanzaa is not in replacement of Christmas, it's in addition to. So it's not either or, but it's really a both and. So he did it to help cultivate in us a culturally relevant sense of identity, purpose, and direction. And the timing of it is important because what better way for people of African descent to commemorate the year ending and to demarcate the year beginning, rooted in a culturally grounded, in our culturally grounded virtues and principles that have sustained us since antiquity, throughout the founding of civilizations, surviving the Great Ma'afa, or otherwise known as the Great Tragedy, or the African Holocaust, or the transatlantic slave trade, as we step into the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations of tomorrow. So I really believe it's not a coincidence at all that Watch Night coincides with the 6th day of Kwanzaa, which is Kaumba. And Kaumba, the principle means creativity. And when you consider the creativity that our ancestors had to engender, and that we must engender today just for the sake of combating the physical, the mental, the emotional, psychological, spiritual, the systemic shackles of slavery and racial oppression, it's absolutely important. And it's no coincidence that the last day of Kwanzaa is Imani, which means faith, on January 1st, which is the day of the Emancipation Proclamation, that it was declared at least. So the day of, it really showed evidence that God heard our cries and answered our prayers, and hence it gave us a strengthened faith. So I think there's a significance there, there's a symbolism there. And as Dr. Middleton mentioned, the celebration and the traditions and the rituals began back in September. So Watch Night was actually the 99th night, the 99th day of these traditions and these rituals. And hence that led into the 100th day, which was the Emancipation Proclamation Day.
I'm gonna come back to Watch Night before we close out, but briefly, just because we have this opportunity, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a couple of you about some current affairs. Reverend Middleton, we know the Community Renewal Society owns the Chicago Reporter, an investigative data-based outlet covering race, poverty, and income inequality for nearly 50 years. And of course, WTTW News, we even covered the hiatus that the publication went on over the summer. And then a little bit later, the editor and publisher was removed. You've recently announced that Glenn Reedus will be the interim editor and publisher. And I just wanted to, we haven't heard from you personally on this, so I wanted to get it in if I can. In a statement, you did explain that this is all part of a restructuring of the publication. So what can you tell us about what readers can expect from this newly restructured reporter?
Well, I want to stay true to the celebration, and there's so many other relevant and critical conversations when we think about Anjanette Young and the oppression against Black and brown bodies in our communities. So I want to, if we're going to go astray from talking about Watch Night, I would much rather put my energy there. But I will say that we have put a formal statement on our website that provides those details. But you will see that throughout the course of nearly 140-year history of Community Renewal Society, that there have been diverse in multitudes of transitions that have taken place. And this is a period of time where we are also experiencing a transition, which is not unlike any organization that we see. And so we are very grateful for the community that is so supportive and encouraging to us, understanding and respecting our longstanding history, committed to eradicating racism and poverty, and the independent investigative journalism of the Chicago Reporter, which continues today. We're also very excited, as you mentioned, about Mr. Reedus joining us, someone with a longstanding history in the city of Chicago, great passion for the Rust Belt. And we're excited to see the brilliance and creativity, speaking of Kuumba, that he will bring. And we look forward to the future and seeing Chicago continue to benefit from the gifts of the Chicago Reporter that's longstanding in our city and our community at large. So I do appreciate the question. And I also appreciate the curiosity that many folks have, because the Reporter has been such a gift to our community, and it will continue to serve our community with the same principles and core foundations that it has served. And next year will be 50 years, and we look forward to celebrating that and beyond.
Happy anniversary. We look forward to looking back with you guys when that time comes. So of course, you know, Reverend Wright, in addition to the community work and activism that you and your church are known for, you were also a longtime spiritual advisor to President Obama until the 2008 campaign, when a 2003 sermon of yours surfaced. I'm going to fast forward from that, though. More recently, your name has come up again related to Reverend Raphael Warnock's Senate race in Georgia, the runoff for which is just in a week. Warnock, his opponent, Senator Kelly Loeffler, she has used his support of you against him in ads in Georgia. And I just want to get your reaction to that. What are your thoughts on the weight that your words still carry? Are you surprised at all by that?
No, I'm not. White ignorance is only matched by white arrogance. White people do not watch Black voices. They know nothing about the Black church. They know even less than our kids about Gullah Geechee tradition. And when they see the Black church for the first time, it scares. Do you know Dr. Geneva Smitherman, Brandis?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Dr. Geneva Smitherman is a linguist, brilliant woman. Her book, 1986, Talking, apostrophe, and Testifying, apostrophe, the language of Black America. Because as linguists could have told the world, had the news media asked any linguist about so-called Ebonics, a word coined by Robert Williams, one of the founders of ABSI, combining one of the 5 characteristics of every language spoken in the world: pragmatic semantics, phonics, grammar and syntax. He took the word phonics and the word black, ebony. Had you asked any linguist, they would have told you it's not a dialect, it's not a patois, it's not a lazy tongue, it's a language. It contains all 5 subsets. Now, in her last book, Dr. Smitherman, AWB, Articulate While Black, or Articulate While Black, called me to warn me what she had said about me in her book. We are friends, by the way. But she said, talking about code language and code switching that African Americans do is the reason why, quote, most white folks shit or go blind when they walk in on one of Jeremiah Wright's sermons. They don't know whether to shit or go blind because they don't understand code switching, signifying, or what I'm saying. So no, it does not surprise me. Sarah Palin begged the presidential candidate, McCain, to use me. He has a mixed race child. He wouldn't do it. He said, we're not going down that road. But she knew that would scare white people. The tactic of the media is to scare white people away from black candidates. It was then, it is now, and will be forevermore. One other thing, Dr. Logan, in addition to your well-stated and quite accurate description of what Maulana Karenga had in mind, there's a practical reason you left out, which is the kids out of school. And Kwanzaa is directed at kids. And kids out of school between Christmas and New Year. Teachers out of school. Family celebrations are more possible with school closed and having to do homework and get up and go to class the next morning. Did you?
Yeah, that's very true. And okay.
I was just going to say, in closing, there's a program, I think it's called The View, with Whoopi Goldberg used to be on it. When Mrs. Hasselbeck was going berserk at the way the Trinity congregation was reacting to my sermons, she was saying, look at them, look at them, look at them. I guess she expected them to be objecting like she objected because she's white. This is a black preacher talking to a black congregation. I ain't talking to you, sister girlfriend.
All right. Thank you, Reverend Wright. And we are going to come back to the watch night discussion. I did want to point out really quickly in the Q&A, one of our participants asked a question that Reverend Middleton has answered. The question, though, just so that maybe for those who did not see this in the Q&A, do you encourage children and adults to interview their elders during Kwanzaa and all during this stay-at-home period? I think that's an excellent question. Reverend Middleton responds, absolutely. Children are a central part of the practice. The ears of corn represent the youth. They are key, and interviewing elders would be a beautiful tribute and practice to continue the tradition. This is my belief. Thank you for that question. Reverend Middleton, did you want to add anything to that before we're almost out of time?
Yes, I mean, children are critical. The zawadi, the gifts that are presented, you know, is all of it is designed to help that the continuum, the intergenerational connection. Passing on the oral tradition is so critical, an important part of our tradition and our culture. And so when we celebrate Kwanzaa, the children are right there on the floor in the center of it all. And we recognize the importance. And one of my inspirations for Kwanzaa always remind us that we would put the ears of corn, even if we do not have children ourselves, because we need to recognize that we are responsible for caring for the village. It takes a village to raise a child. And so the commitment to nurturing our youth is critical. And what better and more powerful way of helping them to understand the critical need to pass that on is to have them to interview their elders or something of that nature, to be able to learn and glean in that wisdom from them.
And so before we go, I want to get just one last thought briefly from each of you on Watch Night, and basically how you'll be celebrating, or what you hope next year will bring. Krista, we haven't heard from you in a while. I'd like to start with you, please.
Absolutely. So I am going to create, typically I have a holiday celebration for my team. We were not able to do that. So we're going to have a virtual celebration on New Year's Eve. And it's going to be a couple of things. So it's been, it's very rough for many of my staff, actually contracting COVID, having family members pass away. So we're going to have a little comedy show for a few minutes on New Year's Eve, but then we're also going to open it up for a time of reflection. So we will honor one of our employees who passed away this year. We're going to honor, then we're going to just allow space for people to talk about, how the year has impacted them and then what they look forward to in the new year. So I'm going to open up that space for my staff. And then also after that, me and my family, we will be participating in my Watch Night service for my church.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your staff member.
Thank you.
Dr. Logan.
Yes. Well, first, I just wanted to acknowledge Dr. Wright's point that I did leave out that practicality in terms of kids being out of school. And also the fact that, in the motherland, this time of the year, it's hot, it's a harvest time, and Kwanzaa means, the harvesting of the first fruits. So there's other practical reasons such as that. And also to one of the questions that I see in the chat box, the word that I used was Ma'afa, M-A-A-F-A, and that's a key swipe, which means like the great tragedy, or what some people will say the transatlantic slave trade. But to your question, out of full respect to Brother George Floyd, I'm a leadership and diversity consultant. And unfortunately, it took his tragedy my business just flourished as a result of this man's tragedy. And I have some guilt over that, but nonetheless, it's been a very, very busy year as a leadership and diversity consultant. So what I'm looking forward to doing is sitting around the Kinara with my family, celebration of Kwanzaa and the sixth principle of Kuumba, and just reflecting on all the trials and triumphs of this past year, as well as those that our people have experienced throughout history, and just reflecting on the significance of all that we went through in this past year, all that we're hoping for in this upcoming year. And once all that is said and done, my wife and I will be celebrating our 13th year wedding anniversary. It's actually on Kuumba on December 31st. So that's going on Watch Night. And as far as my hope for the new year, in short, in the interest of time, I would just say that I've come to learn that out of the chaos brings new order. And it's been like, if you think of a hurricane, right? A hurricane brings total destruction, but yet it creates an opportunity for new order. And we've had a lot of chaos and destruction this year, 2020, as a nation, as a world, and we as a people. So I'm looking forward and working for a new order, both in my personal life, within my community, amongst my people, in the country and around the world.
Lucky 13, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Reverend Middleton.
Thank you, yes, and I want to echo what you said, Brandis, to Krista, my condolences to your community and your loss. And congratulations on your anniversary, Dr. Logan.
Thank you.
But I would say that I'm actually excited because typically, because I no longer live in the South, and I don't often get to go home for the New Year's Eve, it will be virtual. So it will give me an opportunity to be able to share in some of those traditions with my community. So some of the Kwanzaa celebrations will be via Zoom. So I do look forward to that. And if I may, I want to give a shout out to the Gullah Geechee Cultural Corridor, which I think is a great resource for being able to identify some ways, even outside of Chicago, but ways to kind of get engaged with not only Kwanzaa, but Watch Night, and learning about the connection and the importance of this cultural heritage. So I look forward to being with my family and friends virtually. And I have already been enjoying Kwanzaa celebrations with friends virtually as well. So I look forward to continuing that. And I bought my own Canara, so I'm excited.
All right now, all right.
Thank you, Reverend Middleton. Reverend Wright, I'm going to give you the last word right before I close us out.
I will be celebrating watch meeting services virtually. My only problem is I have a potpourri of sons and daughters in the ministry to choose from. And I don't know which one how we're doing it. Some of them have 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the evening services because used to before the COVID-19. I don't know how many were having early service. If one of them has an early service, I'll be watching that one, and then 10 o'clock service. But I've got Reggie Williams, I've got Derek Rice, I've got Gina Stewart, got Freddie Haynes and Marcus Cosby, Rudy McKissick, Reginald Sharp. Let me blow Chris away. She's been in fellowship 12 years. I left 12 years ago. She was a member of Trinity until I left. You deserted me. I'll be worshiping. My wife and I will pray out the old year, and our baby daughter pray in the new year. We will make this year's prayer very special for us, in that our baby daughter, who's 30, Kwesi, gave us twin daughters on January 1st. So we'll be celebrating their coming into this world as we celebrate goodbye Trump year. I mean, goodbye 2020 year.
That's a good problem to have, Reverend Wright, to not be sure which one you can make it to. Actually, we've got an attendee here who's saying 8 o'clock service, Rev, just so you know. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and Happy New Year to all of you. And thank you for participating in today's Chicago Tonight Black Voices, a WTTW News conversation. We shared a short form in the chat that should be coming up soon. So for those of you who are joining us, if you click it, there it is right there. If you click it, you can submit ideas, stories, topics, and issues that you think we need to be covering on Black Voices and on Chicago Tonight. So please take a moment to fill that out and share your thoughts. Before we part ways, I hope that all of you enjoyed today's conversation and that you'll watch Chicago Tonight Latino Voices and Chicago Tonight Black Voices, which broadcast on Saturdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. on WTTW, and will stream live and on demand on WTTW.com/news. Also on Facebook and YouTube, so you can't miss us. And please join us on Monday, January 25th. So that's in 1 month at 8 p.m. right here. That is when Ugo Balta will host Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, another WTTW News community conversation. And you can go to WTTW.com/events for details, just like you did with this. Again, I want to thank our participants for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back over now to Tim Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandis, and thank you to the entire panel. What a great conversation, and I hope you enjoyed tonight's conversation. Please join us on Monday, January 18th at 8 p.m. for an event to kick off Firsthand Living in Poverty, a WTTW's year-long multi-platform initiative that puts a human face on the intergenerational poverty of Chicago, featuring a documentary series, expert talks, reported stories, a discussion guide, and community events. Here's the trailer.
I need money to move out. I need money for a car. I need money to get my license. But I mean, if I look at it all like that, I get overwhelmed.
I couldn't even buy my kids nothing for Christmas because I had to choose between making that car payment or getting them something.
It's like you worrying and you going through day-to-day life with so much that you face with.
I feel like I'm constantly playing catch up all the time. I'll get so far and then something else will get thrown at me.
I don't want my kids to feel like they stuck in a trap. You know, I want them to go see the world.
I want to get out of the neighborhood. I want to get my family out of the neighborhood. Sometimes when you're a mother, you just have to keep pushing no matter what.
I love my daughter. I know she loves me. I want a better life for her.
I look to God to take care of me and my family. I know some way, somehow, that He'll make a way for me to make ends meet.
I took the opportunity that was given and built something a little better out of it.
I try to remain optimistic, and somebody could say, I'll give you a chance.
You failed. It's okay. Get back up. It's not in the falling. It's in the getting back up that makes you who you are.
Please visit WTTW.com/firsthand to explore firsthand gun violence and firsthand coronavirus, and on January 18th, firsthand living in poverty. Before we part ways, Watch Night is of special significance this year, not only recognizing the historical importance, but also celebrating the end of a difficult year and the hope and promise of a new year to come. And as such, I wish you and yours a very Happy New Year. Thank you and take care.